Thank you for taking time to evaluate my research presentation on Landa, Hansen, and Schillingburg 2017, Teaching Mands for Information Using When to Children with Autism. This presentation is for Dr. Tullo of the Chicago School of Psychology. Let's get started. An overview of the problem. The primary purpose of this study was to extend Schillingburg, Bowen, Valentino, and Pierce's 2014 study by helping 3 young children with autism overcome their inability to mand for information using when. A secondary goal was to decrease problem behavior related to this communication deficit. The study sought to address 4 questions. Address WH questions due to limited data on when responding. 2. Evaluate with and without contrived establishing operations to determine if the newly acquired skill functions as a mand. 3. Compare 2 EO conditions before and after training. And 4. Assess results of contingency specifying information to determine if it increased appropriate responding. The study participation were 3 children, 2 6-year-old females, and 1 7-year-old male. All of the children did not emit when mands. They all had a history of intolerance to denied or delayed access to their reinforcers, their preferred items or activities. They demonstrated problem behaviors such as tantrums, crying, screaming, and flopping. They saw highly preferred items during the study, but they were out of reach. All participants were instructed to complete behavioral requirements, clean a table, pick up their toys, wash their hands. The time required to complete the task differed by the learner, but it was not longer than 2 minutes to complete per student. The hypothesis questions that the authors sought to answer were: first, does contingency specifying information result in the completion of task and discrimination control? Is it a prerequisite to teaching complex responding relative to reinforcer delays? And lastly, does it foster mands in young participants? Response measurement definitions. The students' behavior requirements were based on parent and teacher reports on common expectations during delays. The dependent variable was defined as the percentage of trials and mands for information during contrived EOs, present, and absent conditions. So they did the EOP and the EOA conditions. Mands were vocal responses when or when can I have whatever the item was. Participants' initiations were vocal and physical attempts by manding or reaching. The behavior was scored as prompted if it occurred 5 seconds after prompting. Secondary measures included percentage of trials with correct mand response to the behavior requirement, and the last one was percentage of appropriate initiations completing the therapist's task versus inappropriate response, such as the student walked away. Response measurement during pre-assessment. Trained observers observed 10 mand for information trial sessions, 5 under EOP and 5 under EOA conditions. The scoring was as follows. Response was scored as independent when the learner initiated instructed behavior within 5 seconds of contingency specifying information. Response was scored as prompted if it occurred 5 seconds after prompting. Initiation for reinforcers were scored as appropriate when the behavior occurred within 10 seconds of completing the task instructed, such as they washed their hands and then they were able to do so. Frequency was appropriate and inappropriate initiations divided by the total frequency of all initiations to yield percentages for each. This chart shows the pre-assessment. 5 sessions over 5 days prior to mand evaluation. Under condition 1, the student manded for an edible or tangible. It was juice or chips or a book. He or she manded for it, and then they were given the item as a reinforcer. Under condition 2, on the right, if a student did not emit a mand, he was given access to the edible or tangible for 30 seconds, then the item was removed until a mand was evoked. Now, if the child didn't do so, the therapist used vocal and gesture prompts to help teach the child the appropriate behavior requirement. If the child said, "May I have a snack," for example, the therapist provided contingency after you put your toys away. Another methodology during training prior to mand evaluation, consisted of a constant time delay for teaching students contingency specifying statements. Did the student complete the task or the behavior requirement? If the answer is yes, the student was given access to the preferred item. And then he or she was ready for Mand for information training. However, if the student did not, and the answer is he did not complete the task, they were taught contingency specifying statements prior to training. And they had to complete the requirement and then Mand for the reinforcer appropriately. Training continued until the criteria for that student was met. Research for Mand for information. The procedure was the same for the pre-assessment. Across baseline, training, and post-training sessions, procedures were identical, except Mands for information were not prompted during baseline or post-training. Sessions lasted 5 to 10 minutes, and they consisted of 10 trials, the 5 random EOP and 5 EOA. This chart shows Mand for information. Under the EOP trial, the student accessed the item by two ways. He had to guess the correct requirement or emit the Mand for when. The participant accessed the item, but if the participant didn't guess or emit the appropriate Mand, the therapist delivered the contingency specified statement. In the EOA trial, the student manded for an item and the therapist specifically denied access with the statement, "After you wash your hands." This contingency specified statement was to teach the child the reinforcement was denied until the student completed one of 5 behavioral requirements. Withholding information was assumed to evoke and reinforce the participant's Mands for information. Research methods during training. The sessions were identical to baseline and post-training sessions, except a constant time delay was used to teach students to Mand for information during EOP trials. After 1 second delay, the therapist delivered a textual or echoic prompt to the student. Prompt delays were extended to 3 seconds once the student responded correctly. This was to encourage the student's independent responding. The results of this study, baseline, showed students did not emit Mands for information during EOP, which we suspected. EOA trials, all students completed behavioral requirements 80 to 100% of the trials when contingency specified statements were given, and almost always emitted appropriate initiating during EOA in all phases. Again, not seeing the items within reach. EOP trials with contingency specifying statements was withheld. Students were unable to consistently perform. They persistently manded for the denied items. Mand for information training, all students emitted the Mand for information when under EOP trials. Manding was exclusively under the control of the relevant EO. It was appropriate relative to inappropriate initiations. Training, there was no change in EOA conditions, so the trials were not displayed by the authors. My feedback on results. The authors' study results and conclusions extend prior research findings and demonstrate successful teaching under EOP and EOA conditions. Contingency specified statements appear to be an effective prerequisite to appropriate responding and foster Mands in young children. Following training, Mand when increased responses exclusively when information was withheld. The authors posed 2 possible conclusions that seem plausible. 1, therapist's verbal response served as an SD, resulting in acquisition of the discriminated response, or 2, the absence of contingency specifying information served as an EO, resulting in acquisition, and conversely, EOA served as an abolishing operation.
Mommy, please have more crackers.
You want crackers?
Yeah.
Good asking.
May I have more crackers?
First, you have to clean the table, John. Can you clean the table?
Circle, circle, circle.
Over here too. Remember? Good job. May I have the sponge? Good job.